It was cold, very cold, and snow lay thick on the ground. Mr. Robin searched in vain for food. He couldn't find any insects to eat because they were hiding away from the cold. He couldn't dig for worms because the ground was too hard and icy. At last, cold and hungry, he gave up and flew back to his nest. Mrs. Robin was hungry too. "Is there anything for supper?" she asked. Mr. Robin shook his head. He tried to say no, but it came out as a brrr. "Never mind," said Mrs. Robin cheerfully. "Perhaps we'll have better luck tomorrow." But the next day was even colder, and still Mr. Robin couldn't find anything to eat. Mr. Robin decided to search for food in the garden of a nearby house. Suddenly, there was a noise from the house. With a tweet of alarm, Mr. Robin hid behind a snowman. Peeking around, he saw a window being opened. A hand scattered something on the windowsill. When everything was quiet again, Mr. Robin flew up to the window to investigate. Perching on the windowsill, Mr. Robin saw some neat little holes in the snow. He stuck his beak down one of the holes and could hardly believe his luck when he found a juicy raisin. Besides raisins, there were crumbs of bread and cake. There was even some cinnamon toast. Mr. Robin hurried back to Mrs. Robin, and together they returned to the windowsill, where they enjoyed a delicious supper. When they were finished, Mrs. Robin peered in through the window, twisting her head this way and that to get a better view. Suddenly she gasped. "Look," she said, "there's a fir tree growing inside the house." The robins had never seen a tree like it. At the top was a bright star, and hanging from the branches were twinkling lights, shiny colored glass balls, little toys, and candy canes. There were also some long pieces of glittering tinsel. "Look at that silver moss," breathed Mrs. Robin. "Isn't it beautiful?" Later that evening, when they were back in their nest, Mrs. Robin said, "Wouldn't our nest look lovely with some of that silver moss woven in among the twigs? Will you get some for me, dear?" Mr. Robin gulped. He was afraid that if he went into the house he might get caught. But he couldn't bear to disappoint Mrs. Robin. "Of course I will. I'll get some for you tomorrow," he said, trying to sound brave. "Now let's get some sleep." The next morning, Mr. Robin flew over to the windowsill. There was no one in the room, and the window was open. He fluttered in and settled on a branch of the tree. Suddenly the door burst open, and into the room came two large people and two small ones. "Merry Christmas, Matthew and Emily," said the two large people. "Choose a present from the Christmas tree." Mr. Robin shivered with fright and tried to hide. The little person called Matthew asked for a candy cane, but the one called Emily pointed to Mr. Robin and cried, "I want the toy robin." "But I'm not a toy," thought Mr. Robin. "I'm a real live robin." And just as the big hand reached up to lift him from the tree, he sprang to the top branch, threw back his head, and started to sing at the top of his voice. As he trilled and whistled and chirped, the people clapped their hands. When he had finished his song, Mr. Robin flew out the window and hopped down onto the windowsill. Emily ran across the room. "Thank you, little Robin," she said, "for making this the best Christmas tree ever. Come and see us again." When Mrs. Robin heard what had happened, she forgot all about the tinsel. "As long as you're safe," she said, "that's all that matters." But 12 days after his adventure, Mr. Robin found the fir tree lying near the trash cans. Caught on its branches were some scraps of tinsel. Mr. Robin took them back to decorate the nest. Mrs. Robin was overjoyed. She had her silver moss after all.